Welcome back, I'm Tedward. Welcome back to my Lexus GX 460, and welcome to a conversation of what I consider to be the worst trends in the auto industry that I think are reversible. And with all due respect, I'm asking myself all the time when I drive new cars, is this better? Because the auto industry is starting to remind me of the fast food industry. Every chain restaurant you go to was once likely started by a passionate person who wanted to serve an excellent product to as many people as possible. And they achieved their fame by making good food, making a good product at good value. But eventually, what happens? It gets sold to a private equity firm who then cost cuts to increase shareholder value rather than delight the customer. And we're left with brands that are just not very exciting, not very healthy, and not great value. The auto industry is seemingly becoming that because every car company was once started by an immensely passionate person who wanted to make the next big thing, who wanted to make a vehicle that was going to supersede whatever they had seen before, and sometimes even out of spite. We see Ferruccio Lamborghini went out and said, hey, Ferrari's not doing what I think is the best, so he made a car company. I miss those days. And now, every time I drive a new car, I'm wondering, where are those spiteful capitalists who want to beat the other guy at quality, at performance, and not simply making a buck and focusing on a focus group? Listen to the people that actually make the product. So first, let's start out with something. I'm using this GX 460 not only because it's the car available to me right now in the winter, all my other cars are asleep, but because I think this is one of the last vehicles that actually has most of the things I like about cars before everything goes wrong. So first of all, GX 460. Let's talk about nomenclature. Names used to mean something. Not all the time, but most of the time, a name would have a class of vehicle, it tells you what the chassis is, and a number that would signify something, usually displacement. So, certainly back in the day, you'd have a Maserati 3500. That told you that it had a 3.5 liter inline six. If a Ferrari was an F355, it told you that it had a 3.5 liter V8 with a 5 valve per cylinder head. That's the F355. The 458 is a 4.5 liter V8, okay? They don't always mean the exact same thing, but at least the name means something. And if you're somebody who has ever worked in an industry where you've had to categorize products, when the names mean something, it is so much easier than having to memorize stuff. Now, over here, there seems to be an abandoned Malibu. Malibu is Malibu, and if you can make a brand out of a name, that's great. But Malibu, you have to know what it is. I can't tell you what's under the hood of that thing, probably some V6, and I don't really remember, but I know what a Malibu is. But I miss the days when you could look at a name, and the name told you most of what you needed to know about the car. And the GX is a fantastic example because the current GX is a GX 550. It certainly does not have a 5.5 liter engine. So now we're just naming things with bigger numbers because bigger numbers are better? I don't think so. Cars these days are bought and sold on style. People come in the door because they look a certain way. But one of the things that frustrates me about new cars is the wheel size. People are going bigger and bigger on wheels, which means the sidewall is getting cut, which means that suspension has to do even more work to try to smooth out the ride. So we have to get all these complicated magnetic or air suspension systems to compensate for a tiny little sidewall on your Denali or whatever. And I'm not trying to call out people individually. This is not meant to be a harsh take on what the auto industry is, because I know a lot of hardworking people do this and they feel like they're kind of pigeonholed into it because they think that's what the market is. But please bring back some sidewall. Let us have the comfort of a 18-inch wheel on an SUV. We do not need 24s. And while we're talking about the exterior vehicles, how about the first thing that you interact with in your car every single day? The door handle. This is a great example of a good door handle. And there's really no need to make that better. It works, it's functional, it's safe. I never pinch myself in it. The only additions to this are some locking mechanisms and unlocking mechanisms if it works correctly when it's wet. And that's fine. But what frustrates me is now we've got door handles that retract into the vehicle that In a Star Trek world, isn't it nice to have doors that simply open for you, except that they don't always work when you want them to work? So for example, Mercedes S-Class, you walk up to the car, occasionally the door handle is prepared for you. Occasionally it's not. Or you've had an ice storm, because we live in New England here, and that does happen. And even these door handles can get a little stuck, but if these need to have a motor that pushes them out just so I can use it. And then, by the way, the clicking mechanism isn't actually very satisfying because it's all just electronic. Well, that's not better. And it's solving a problem we didn't have. We didn't need that. And if the argument from the auto industry is that it's reducing the coefficient of drag on the car, well, there's other ways to go about that that don't ruin my experience every time I approach the vehicle. And frankly, every time I drive a G-Wagon or an air-cooled 911, the door handle is the first thing that I show off, and the comments go crazy. They're like, oh my God, listen to this door handle. It feels great. And that's the thing. It does delight the customer. We can go back to that. We can have nice things that are fun to use and satisfying because we like tactility. We're humans. We like to touch things. And if we want to get really nitpicky on the very high end of the spectrum, we don't need doors that open themselves. I don't need a car that I can summon from across the parking lot. And to be fair, every time someone has tried to summon a car for me to say, hey, check this out, it has never worked correctly, or it has always gone a little bit wrong. Like, we need to stop putting things into vehicles that are not completed. I do not want to be a beta tester, and yet that's where we're at. Another thing is in the back of this GX460. Oh yes, underneath there, I can't really see it, but there's a spare tire, a full-size spare tire. Now, we don't need a full-size spare, but it has a spare tire, and that means that if something goes wrong, I hit the wrong pothole, something punctures a tire, I am not stuck. I can change a tire on the side of the road. Or if I am incapable of changing a tire for whatever reason, I can call a tow truck, and that tow truck guy can come and change my tire with the spare tire that's there. If I'm in the middle of nowhere on a new vehicle with a 24-inch wheel, do you think that in the middle of nowhere, a tire shop has a 24-inch tire for my modern vehicle? Very likely not, which means that now I'm stuck in town. So not only am I losing time, I'm probably having to spend a lot of money to stay in a hotel. It's not better. Package vehicles that we have spare tires. That's all we need. We need the ability to get away. We need a little bit of safety net, and one spare tire, even if it's a donut, is just enough to get you on your way to the place you need to go to fix that, repair it, and get moving. But maybe if that spare tire was making room for the packaging for an ultra-large fuel tank in order to achieve an incredible range, then I could forgive that lack of a spare tire. However, cars seemingly get smaller and smaller fuel tanks over time. Now this, thankfully, has a 20-gallon fuel tank. It gives me about a 400-mile range. It's pretty solid. However, my Honda Civic only has a 12-gallon fuel tank, and that works great amongst most of the Civic lineup because Civic has hybrids and 1.5 liters and all kinds of great setups. But my Civic is a Honda Civic Type R, which means it doesn't get 50 miles per gallon. It gets about 26 to 30 miles per gallon. So I have to fill up that little 12-gallon tank all the time. But we're noticing this over the course of most of the auto industry. Fuel tanks are getting smaller and smaller. Range on internal combustion engine cars are just incredibly small, which is so strange in a world where all we do is critique the range of our EVs. Now, obviously, it's a lot easier to fill a tank, but where are the days where we got really big fuel tanks and no one's bragging about their big fuel tanks and no one's bragging about their range? If you get a Suburban diesel, you can get a Suburban diesel, by the way, that has like a 700 or 800 mile range. That should be the headline. You fill that thing like once every 2 weeks. It's fantastic. So bring back big fuel tanks, or at least reasonable fuel tanks, because little tanks are not better. Let's get inside the vehicle, because one of the greatest things about a car like this is its visibility. I actually have great visibility. The hood drops down so I can see pretty close to what's in front of the vehicle. I've got this nice and low. It's not up on my shoulder like a Camaro. And when I turn around, I've got glass everywhere and I can see. Let's bring back visibility. Now, I know that safety standards make it a little difficult in this department, but I think we've overlooked the point that we need to see out of our vehicles. And the Band-Aid that we have gotten from the auto industry are cameras in our rear view mirrors, cameras on the side, cameras in the dashboard, things that show us what's going on. But wouldn't it be nice if we didn't need those cameras? Because I think people see the cameras and they think, oh, that's a luxury, that's innovative technology. But what I'm seeing is a Band-Aid for a lack of visibility. And it feels like we've just completely lost the plot, that we need to be able to see out of our vehicles to drive them safely. I'm going to start this and show you one of the greatest things about the GX460. Gauges. I have one little screen in the center of this vehicle. It gives me all of the information I could ever need: my odometer, my miles per gallon, how long the engine's been running, the temperature, the transmission. It tells me what I need to know, but not too much. But then, what do I have flanking that little screen? I have some of the most beautiful tachometer and speedometer, fuel gauge, and temp gauge. I love this because when I was a kid, one of the greatest things that could ever happen to me is when I got into an unfamiliar vehicle. My dad's friend comes over, or we're at a car show. I look inside the vehicle and I get to see what the gauges look like on an Audi, on a Ferrari, on a Mustang. That's really fun. And we know that the auto industry values this because, for example, Ford, when they came out with their Dark Horse, they gave us a screen, and the screen can be programmed to show us the gauge cluster of vintage Mustangs, a Fox body, for example. Well, that's great, but I don't want to buy a video game. And I know that's like a trite statement, but the reality is the jewelry of these gauges is genuinely important. And I know this to be true because you guys get really mad about my smartwatch all the time. Now, I wear this Garmin because I'm a runner, although, geez, I haven't really been running because my knee's a little messed up. But let's pretend I am. I use this for lots of other things. But this is not your favorite watch. Your favorite watch is probably a Speedmaster or some kind of Rolex Daytona or an IWC or something interesting that clearly does not have the technology or capabilities or innovations of a smartwatch, whether it's an Apple or a Garmin or a Samsung or what have you. You want something with needles. You want something that needs to be wound. You want something that needs to be a super automatic that does all these things. Is that what it's called? I'm not a huge watch guy, but I understand the appeal. And what I don't understand is how luxury vehicles, high-end vehicles, are now all digital. Now, I get it if you're Honda, you're Hyundai, you're Ford. In some of these occasions, it makes sense to go full digital. A Honda Civic, sure, go for it. It's not that important that I get a bespoke, cool gauge cluster in a Honda. That's fine. However, when you're talking Bentley, when you're talking Rolls-Royce, and you're giving me a screen, it feels like it's completely missed the plot. Now, I understand that they're trying to give you the versatility. For example, Porsche has removed their tachometer. That iconic center tachometer is gone, and it's a screen in their 992.2s. The digital display is good. It is good, but is it better? I think not. I don't need that center display to show me an entire map. I have a map over here, and I would much rather just simply use this. Now, people bemoan the advent of infotainment screens. In the early 2000s, we had them kind of mounted in the center, like my E39 M5 from 2001. That's fine. I think that's okay. You get a nice clean dash layout. This, I think, splits the difference. I actually really love the versatility and the usefulness of this screen, and the placement makes it really easy for me to touch. But what I like about this is that it is not an entire waterfall of screen. And unfortunately, a selling point for cars now is marketing the size of that screen as if you've got an 80-inch television. I don't really need a 16-inch display in the center of my car. And this is where, even if we have full digital layouts and we ignore all of this, one thing that I find is a very big safety issue is when you completely lose the idea of buttons, switches, and knobs. Because when you have your climate within a sub-menu, and that's the only way to use it, it is not better. It is very difficult to use. I do not want to have to think about anything while I'm driving a vehicle. I just want to know that, hey, I can just hit this button, I can feel it. I don't need to look. When I'm driving my Lexus, I do not need to look. And in a lot of older cars, that is just the standard. There was a knob for the fan speed, for where your vents are pointed, for how hot you want it. And I really think that we have completely lost the plot in a lot of new cars where they have completely integrated it into the screens. Now, and I understand that when you're sitting in a dealership, when you're sitting in a showroom, when you're sitting in a design studio for that matter, developing this, it may look extremely good. It may even seem better to you as that software developer. However, as a driver who drives cars, I just don't think it's a big leap to realize that that is not better and that we should not need to go into software to run motors in every individual vent in order to aim things. If I am too hot or if I've got air blowing in my face and my eyes are getting dry on a long drive, I just want to go like this or turn it off. I do not want to go through a sub-menu of a sub-menu to adjust that and hope for the best. It is vague, it is dangerous, and that is not better. And on that same point, steering wheel buttons have gotten a little bit out of control. I think this is pretty simple. It's pretty much the maximum I want to see on a steering wheel. And really, the reason we got steering wheel buttons in the first place was primarily just to turn the volume up and down and maybe change the radio station. But now you've got all kinds of controls because the cars have gotten so technologically advanced that you need to be able to control your radio, your screens, your cruise control, your autopilot, or what have you if you have some level of autonomous driving. There's too much going on the steering wheels, but what was once meant to keep your eyes on the road without having to take your hands off the wheel to change a radio station or a volume is now I actually have to stare at the buttons on a lot of cars because I don't even understand where the buttons are, what they mean, how they work, and I miss the days of having just tactile, ergonomic, good buttons that are not too littered. We don't need that much. We put too much in the cars. And although I could go on and on and on, I'm going to give one last example. Traction control, okay? It used to be that if you hit that button, traction control was off. Traction control was off. Now, what you really have to do is you have to press and hold. So we'll wait a few seconds. We'll get some more lights coming up. Now traction control is off. But is it? In some cars, that's still not off. And it's difficult to explain this to people because they're maybe getting a little bit of slip angle, they're getting a little bit of wheel spin, so they think, oh, it's all off. But for example, in my Honda Civic Type R and in a BRZ or an FRS, you have to do another step where you have to do a pedal dance where you have to hit the brake and you have to turn on and off the parking brake a few times in a certain sequence, and then that will fully disable everything. This is frustrating, and I understand that there's certain liabilities for car companies that they don't want to have anybody getting into silly accidents because people accidentally hit the button, but we now have Game Shark levels of sequences in order to turn off nannies in our cars, and I just, for one, don't think that's better. But for the most part, all of these complaints are reversible. All of these car companies can come to the conclusion that maybe a screen isn't the way. Maybe we do want needles on our gauges. Maybe we do want buttons to touch. And I know that certain car companies have already figured this out. When you look at Volkswagen, they went into haptic digital controls for the windows and everyone went nuts. People just didn't buy the cars and they're like, whoa, we need to go back. Now, I think that maybe the late 2020s and early 2030s will be a resurgence into bringing nice tactility back to vehicles, but only if we talk about it, only if it's something that's an expectation of the consumer. Because if Wendy's, if McDonald's, if Burger King just keeps changing out the meat to be lesser and lesser quality, they give us worse buns, they give us less fries, they give us cheaper ketchup, and we just keep buying it for higher and higher prices, well, they're going to keep selling it to us. But if we, the people, start talking about these things in earnest and really feel like, hey, I'm keeping my older car not just because it's expensive to buy a new car, but because I don't even want what's new, maybe they will listen. So please don't take this as an attack on the auto industry. Please take it as a remembrance of what we like about cars, what we like about driving, because I like touching things. I like pressing buttons. I like V8s. Now, I know that might go away, and that's something that we're just going to have to deal with. But you know what I don't have to deal with? Not having a spare tire, having a really crummy range on my internal combustion engine because the fuel tank is 8 gallons, and not knowing how to change the direction of the vents because it's within a submenu. So please let me know, what are your complaints? I'm sure we could talk about headlight aiming and LEDs and all kinds of things. So let me know in the comments, what are the things that you are bummed out about that you think are just simply not better in your new cars? And what are the things that certain automakers are doing really right that you're like, oh, someone's listening? Because we want to celebrate those things as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one.